And this is aimed at musicians. Perhaps you played guitar, keyboards or something. You've got musical knowledge, but you're unsure about getting into making dance tunes. It just sort of never seems to work or whatever. And this is what this tutorial is about. It's a kind of primer of making dance music, the absolute basics, right? Okay, now there's two things I'm going to be emphasising here. Not genre, but what are the roots of electronic dance music, and what are the techniques that you need to get into if you are a traditional musician and your focus is on pitch, melody, scales, harmony, all that kind of thing, right? Because that's the last thing you want, often, most of the time, in making dance music. Now, yes, there are genres out there, particularly in the 90s. Genres started coming in, which, for want of a better phrase, whitened dance music, or they went for more white classical culture for the references for their chord progressions and things. You could say metal did the same, to be honest. In other words, it was getting away from its black music roots, like metal, where they're using a lot of classical structure and classical chord progressions, modes and all the rest of it, took metal away from its black roots, which, if you want to know, my opinion is the first kind of heavy metal track was I'm a Man by Muddy Waters. That's got all that power and energy and that driving grind of what really constitutes hard rock for me. But anyway, so yeah, there are genres that use very beautiful classically based chord progressions, and that's the foundation of the tune. But we're going to go away from that. I'm going to sort of push you to focus on something different, because there's two things about dance music. One, it's primarily based around rhythm. Two, generally speaking, a DJ, even if they've got not the scrap of musical knowledge or skills, will usually turn out a better dance music track than a trained musician. And that's because DJs are thinking in linear terms, rhythmic terms. They're thinking about the linear progression of the track, of the song. All right? And in terms of its rhythmic stuff that's going on, how it'll work on the dance floor. Whereas musicians inevitably come to the sequencer, come to the workbench with their baggage, let's call it, which is all about scales, modes, harmony, melody, and all that stuff, right? So the first thing is, if you want to get into making dance music, and this has been my advice going back decades, learn to play the drums. I don't mean a drum kit. Get a hand drum of some type. It can be a cheap bongo. Join a class, in an evening class or something, and learn as many hand drum patterns as you can. And they come from all cultures, right? And they're in all sorts of timing, right? And you just want to learn all the possible variations, so your mind starts to think in terms of rhythmic variations and rhythmic cross rhythms and all that, right? Because they are the foundation of all your bass lines and your synth patterns. You hear them as melodies being played on a synth, but if you break them down and listen, they're actually a rhythmic pattern that could be played on a drum that has been then transferred to an instrument with pitch, and some of the notes, some of the hits of that rhythm have been put on different pitches to make a melody. But the underlying pattern is a rhythm pattern. So learn to play drums, and I'm going to show you that by what I mean by that. I've got a basic backbeat here, back to play along to. And I set up a Boutique 909 like this. It's just a very, very, very simple drum machine. And I got the musical typing. I mean, this could be... I've got a master keyboard plugged in, right? I got this tom, right, which is on A2, I think, in this octave for the drums, right, on the H key. And all I did was I bashed out some cross rhythm patterns to go with this drum beat. Now I'll attempt to do it. It's a bit hard when you're doing screen capture. There's a slight delay, right? So this might not be in very good time, but you just basically listen to the basic backbeat or a metronome, and you bash out some patterns. Right, so let's try some. Here we go. So there's one. that's a rhythm, right? There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. You see, the more hand patterns you learn from different, Latin stuff, any kind of drumming from any culture, the more there are rhythmic patterns in your mental arsenal, right? Okay, so you just get the master keyboard and bash out some drum patterns. Now I've got 3 drum patterns here that I did exactly like I just showed you. I'd hit record, bash them out using that tom. So here's the first pattern, right? And I tap the key very briefly, just tap and tap really quick and lifting my finger off. And then once I got the resulting pattern, I quantized it. This is one of the patterns I played in. Notice the other thing, large gap in the pattern. Don't think your patterns have to be all crowded into one bar. You can make a pattern very effectively by leaving more gaps and making that pattern over 2 bars, right? Or even 4 bars. So there's the first pattern I bashed out. This is the second pattern I bashed out, and you'll notice I was holding the key down. When I was pressing the H QWERTY key, I was holding it down and releasing rather than just tap, tap. So some of the notes are longer, but they're all playing that same A note, triggering that same tom. Right? And then I tapped in this third pattern. Again, this time I used very short little staccato stabs on the H key. Right, just pump and off, right? And then I quantized it and I got this pattern. So by making these patterns, my entire focus was on creating cross rhythms, creating rhythmic stuff. I wasn't even thinking about what note should I play next. I didn't have that distraction. But now, if I take this drum pattern and put it up onto this classic organ track, there's a basic classic house organ on here, we get this. There's some echo on that, so I take that off. And now, let's just deselect and reselect so we get notes here rather than the drum names which it carried over. All the 3 patterns I played in from that H key result in notes on this A1 key, right? And I was focusing entirely on the rhythmic pattern, but now we put it onto an instrument which has the ability to play different pitches. Right? Because some of these patterns, yes, you can make them play any sound you want. I mean, that is the secret. I mean, I'm not a great expert on the genre of tech house, but I've listened to a little bit of it, and I once spent a wonderful night in Germany where 2 tech house DJs did a live set using Tractor Scratch, I think. They were actually composing the set as they went along, bringing in lots and lots of different sounds. And as I understand it, I'm not an expert, but tech house is about sounds rather than melodies and all the rest of it. But so these can play anything. It can be a sound like anything you like, right? But we bashed it in using a tom. We've now got it on an organ track, right? And we could now push these notes around to make a pattern. Or let's try that one. This drum pattern. Oh, take that off. Okay, let's use that one. And again, when I built this pattern, I was using a drum and I was entirely focused on the cross rhythm that worked with the main beat. But now it's been transferred to a pitched instrument, and again, deselect and reselect to get notes in the piano key here rather than it. When you just drag a pattern from a drum track onto a pitched instrument track, it carries the drum names with it. So you deselect, reselect, and you get the keys back here. Again, all these patterns are played on the same drum, so they're all in A. But now I can push up that note to a C. And then I can now focus on where do I want to push those notes to create my melody. But the rhythmic quality of it was me playing a drum. And that's so important to get into this whole thing of rhythm. And leave the melodies. You can always push the notes up and down to make melody afterwards. Okay, now this is a 4-bar pattern. There's a temptation to make the second half, the next 2 bars, repeat the first. But you know what? I'm going to leave these 3 notes without bringing the pitch of that one up. And just do the same pitch thing at the end. That gives it a bit of variety. In the second half of the 4-bar pattern, it's slightly different. Okay, and we've got, hey presto, a house organ pattern. I mean, it could be any instrument, but the point is we focused entirely on playing a rhythm, not on the pitch, and now we're making it play the melody we want, right? Okay, now this second drum pattern here, where I held the keys down longer before releasing on some of the notes, let's push that up onto this bass track. Now, one thing we know is because all these 3 percussion patterns were played with the same drum note, they're all going to start on the same pitch, which they do. They all begin on A. When they're just a row of drum notes brought over to an instrument, they're all in A. And then we just, like this one, it's in A, but we push some of the notes up to make a different pattern. But it's essentially in the root of A. That's what it started in. This one, again, I played the same drum, so it's in A. And this one, it's the same. If I put it on an instrument, these notes are all in A. So this one with the slightly longer one, where I held the keys down longer, because I was thinking in my head, boom, 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 like that as I played. I held the key down as long as I heard the drum decaying. Now, let's bring in the house organ, right? Okay, now that note, that's where it occurs, timing-wise. If we look in the organ pattern, there's no note in there, so we can shift this. Let's shift it down to a G, which is going down 2 semitones, so it's still going to harmonise with the A. And then up for that note on the bass, because we transfer this drum pattern to the bass now, what's happening in the organ track? Well, it's going up to a D. So I'm going to make this note D. But the note that climbs up to the D in the organ pattern is a C, so we could make this note a C. But no, you can hear a clash there, because as that note is just before it ends, the D note comes in. So I'll make it a D. And then just repeat that. If I want to do this one, could be shortened to short like the one previous, because I played it by hand, holding down the key, and I held this one down slightly longer, but you don't have to do that. That little variation of this note lasting fractionally longer than the previous one in the same pitch in the first half of the pattern could work. This one perhaps a little shorter. So presto, we've got a bass line, and an organ pattern from 2 drum patterns played on the same drum along with the main beat. Now here's our third pattern. Our third pattern, which sounds like this. Right, we push that up to this track here, which has got another synth sound on it. Again, it's in A because it was played on the same drum note as the other patterns, right? So it begins in the same key. Now we can do something with this. So if we reel back the playhead, there's the bass note dropping down to G. What's happening in this pattern at that point? Nothing. Go forward to the pattern there with the little organ. Okay, there it goes up to a C, and in this pattern underneath, well, let's just have a listen to this with the organ. I'm going to drop these 2 down to a G, and then these 2 up to a D. Like that. Or maybe a C. Don't think the C is going to work because where those 2 notes occur there, we've just ended our bass note, which is a D, and we've just ended that note, which is a D. Well, maybe these would act as a climb down note, as C. No, let's have them as D. Yeah, and then bring in the tech bass. Hey presto. We've got a theme. Yeah, okay, yes, because I'm using the technique from the old days, and I mean the really old days before MIDI. It inevitably ends up sounding a little bit, you know, like some sort of Ice Records from Eddie Grant's Coach House type thing, you know, a bit early housey. Okay, so there's the first thing. Get into rhythm. Right? Get your mind away from pitch, melody, scales, modes, and all that theory stuff. Learn to play drums, bash out your patterns, and then transfer those rhythmic patterns to instruments, and then mess with the pitch. And you'll find that this really gets you so that you're in the zone of it's about rhythm, not, you know, because we're not making a piece of film score here, right? This is dance music. It's got to be rhythmic. We want to dance to it. Okay, that's the first technique. Focus on the rhythm. Now the next, and again, this is an old school thing. Now the next bit is like, this goes to the thing about why is it that DJs will always tend to make a better dance track than a trained musician. And again, it's because the DJ understands about the linear progression of the music. The DJ's thinking about a dance floor, people dancing, right? They're not thinking about what melody, where can it go to at the end of this bridge or at the end of the verse I want to go to a bridge. What note should I go to? They're thinking about what is the music doing in terms of its linear progression, how it's getting the dance floor moving, right? So the next thing is the composition of dance music that you hear even today, and there's some extremely complex dance music, there's no ifs or buts about it. You know, it's become incredibly complicated, some of the genres, in terms of the effects and the builds and everything like that. In fact, some genres are virtually nothing but a series of very clever builds strung together with a bit of music in between almost, some of the stuff I've heard. All right, but the next thing I want to show you as you want to get into making dance music, you really want to understand about the roots of dance music, regardless of genre. Because back in the old days, electronic dance music, where people were using electronic instruments, came out at the end of the disco era. All right, disco music, and by that I don't mean disco genre, I mean music played in discotheques, clubs, was underground. Yeah, there was the transition out of the old funk, which was coming out of soul, and the Staxy funky stuff and all the rest of it, and that transitioned into like early jazz funk, and then it got more jazzy, and then the disco-y thing came in. They became more and more popular with Saturday Night Fever, and disco became a big thing, and it all kind of collapsed in on itself because people got fed up with the genre. It became really cheesy. You'd go to a club where previously they played fantastic tracks. I can remember exactly the day that I kind of went, no, this is changing. I don't know what year it was, 78, 79, and the DJ played Disco Nights, I think, by the Isley Brothers. Yeah. Make it stop! Make it stop! Please! And I was used to things like, from the Isley Brothers, playing tracks like The Pride. Oh yeah, that's the funk. And suddenly there was this god-awful disco track coming out from the Isley Brothers, and I was like, oh, this is just bloody awful. But at the same time, towards the end of that era, late 70s, you were getting tracks coming in like Peter Brown, Do You Want to Get Funky With Me, that was starting, and Cerrone, Supernature, and all those kind of things that were using, and of course the Giorgio Moroder stuff, Donna Summer, etc., that were using more and more electronics. And I believe it's true to say the Bee Gees, in fact, were the first, well, certainly the first big commercial group to use drum loops, which is how their tracks had that robotic timing. But people don't realise that. They do use drum loops. Yes, they may have been played by a real drummer, but then they were looped. So I think I'm right in saying that. So things at the end of the 70s, disco collapsed and it went underground again. DJs and musicians discovered these early electronic instruments, 808s, 909s, 606s, and synthesizers, often which had arpeggiators they could clock to the drum machine. And they started turning out what you would say was music influenced by the disco era and the jazz funk era, but it was electronic, and that was the beginning of house and techno. That continued on, and then we had acid house and the early rave stuff and the beginnings of trance music and all the rest of it. But the roots of it all is in the hardware equipment before, because you've got to remember, even at the end of the 90s, when dance music had hit a peak, it had come, there'd been the Summer of Love, 88 and 89 at the end of the 80s. For want of a better, join the two together, because there's this kind of peak. All these genres were coming into the 90s. It got more and more and more. Prodigy and Orbital and all those bands actually started having hits in the charts. And I mean, in the British charts, there was a seismic shift in what type of music was being played at the end of the 80s, when two tracks entered the British charts. The Only Way Is Up, Neneh Cherry, and they were pop tracks, but done in a dance style using electronic, and that's when it all snowballed in. It started to become a conscious thing in the masses. Then dance music started to become big and bigger and bigger through the 90s, until it kind of, well, the same thing happened with disco. It became so popular everyone got disillusioned with it. But out of that came this colossal amount of genres as people went off down their own avenues. Sorry, I'm digressing here, but the point I'm saying here is that it all goes back. All the early foundation genres go back to the pre-MIDI days, or the very, very early days of MIDI, and certainly before we had DAWs like Logic and Cubase that could reliably play audio in sync with MIDI They were just happening in the early mid-90s. That was just starting to happen, but we didn't have reliable instruments that would always work, like VST instruments, which would always work and would sync with the audio properly every time and was always work. That really didn't start happening till 97, 98, 99, towards the end of the 90s, right? VST 3.5, I think, was probably or 3.6, it started to get stable, that concept. But people were using Saw 4-track and Saw Studio, particularly if they were doing loop-based music, like tons of jungle and drum and bass and stuff like that. Rave music was done on Saw and Saw Plus by simply assembling loops. And people were using Cubase, early Cubase audio, and Cakewalk, of course, right? Well, anyway, the point is, all the foundation of all the genres comes out of pattern-based sequencing. You go back to the early days, your drum box had patterns. Pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. In banks, A, B, C, D. So maybe you'd get 16 patterns in 4 banks, giving you a total of 64 patterns. All right? You had hardware sequencers that had patterns. And they would, using early MIDI, you could sync your drum box to your hardware sequencer. The drum box would trigger the drums from its own sequencer. That would be synced to your hardware sequencer with MIDI clock. And the hardware sequencer would trigger the bass line on one MIDI channel, and would trigger the lead synth line on a second MIDI channel, and would trigger the sampler to fire off sample loops on another MIDI channel. So everything was pattern based. And to really understand dance music and to get into it, you've got to strip back to the pattern based way of working. Now, to show you that, I'll make a new project here. I won't close that. I'll make an instrument track, and then I'm going to just make that bigger. Now, I won't need this now. Now, there's an instrument track, and on it I'm going to put a very simple electronic drum kit. But a simple 909, which has got multiple outs, but you're really limited. Now, imagine this is your drum box with its own internal sequencer. All right? And the way it would work, actually I will have that MIDI, that musical typing. I haven't got a master keyboard plugged in. And the way this would work is you have the metronome playing, right? And you would probably start with your kick or your open hi-hat, and you'd hit record on the drum box sequencer. I listen to the metronome and start bashing out your pattern. And you do it layer at a time. So you'd start out. Oh, it's the A key. You'd start out. And you knock out a simple kick drum pattern. And the sequence would just keep going round, playing that pattern. It would auto-quantize it. Now, you can set Logic up to auto-quantize. There is ways to do it. But I'm just going to manually quantize that. Right? Boom, 16ths. And there, so you bash in your basic kick drum. All right, let's loop it. And, right, and that would loop round and round and round, right? And I'll duplicate the track. I'm going to duplicate the track with the same instrument on. And while that plays around, you would then bash in your hi-hat. Like that, listening and playing along. Let's do that. Always the first note's out. A little bit by the sound of it. Quantize that. And then that would begin playing around, right? And then let's make another layer, another track with the same instrument on. And then you put in your closed hat, whatever, doing whatever, I don't know. That's hard to do this, but let's have a go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that. Little doubles. I think I've got that a little bit out there. When I quantize it, might go to the wrong one. No, there you go. you know, and you had the velocity on the 909s and 808s and all that. The 606s, you had a velocity thing you could put on certain steps. So, whoops. So, I didn't double in a note there, did I? By mistake. No. Yeah, so if I just make every other hat a little bit less in velocity. Yeah, then I'm listening to the kick and an open hat going around. I tap in my closed hat, and that gets added to the pattern, and then I switch to the next drum instrument on the drum box, which is, say, the clap, right, E, on this thing here, and I knock in my clap pattern while I listen. Yeah, the first one, you hear it late because of the screen capture, I think. Quantize those, and there's a clap pattern. And then I switch to the next instrument sound I want in my pattern, listening to what's gone before. I built this up by putting the kick, adding the next thing in layers as it goes round and round. And then I'll put in, I don't know, like a side stick. Right? Little offbeat thing like that. Here we go. I see, didn't do it. It's always the first note you tap in with this master keyboard. It doesn't hit it, but just a 16th before that beat. Yeah, and you know, and then I knock in some other. Some other offbeat stuff. Something like that. So you build your pattern. All right, so that's how you would do it, bit by bit, listening to what you'd recorded before and adding in. Now, another way you can do it is you start with your kick drum pattern. Let's make this. We'll call this pattern 1. That would be pattern 1 in your drum box. You then copy that over to pattern 2. So this now becomes pattern 2. You've simply copied that kick drum pattern over to pattern 2 in the next pattern slot of your drum box, and then you will add in the open hi-hat. Play along with the kick, which you've copied. So the kick is in its own pattern, pattern 1. You copy it over to pattern 2 and add, as I showed you then, I add in the open hat or some another drum. So let me just glue these together. Like that. So pattern 2 is a copy of pattern 1 with the hat added. Then that you copy to pattern slot number 3. Right? And you bring in the closed hat. You then play that in. So the pattern 3 has another drum added. This is the way it always used to work. You start with the basic pattern, copy it to the next slot, add something. Copy it to the next slot, add something. All right? And then that you copy to the pattern slot number 4. And you add in, this is pattern 4. And you add in the next drum layer, which is the clap. So now we've got pattern 4, which is pattern 3, but with the added clap. Just close the library, right? And then finally, you copy that to pattern slot 5. So this now becomes pattern 5. And add in the offbeat rim shot thing or whatever it is you want, right? Just glue that in. Boom. So pattern 5 is the same as pattern 4, copied over to pattern slot 5, and you've added another drum, the rim shot. So, see how it works? Pattern 1, kick. Pattern 2 is the kick with the open hat added. Yeah. Pattern 3 is the open hat and kick pattern, copied to pattern slot 3 with the closed hat added. Pattern 3 is then copied to pattern 4, and the clap is added. And finally, that pattern 4 is copied to pattern slot 5, and the rim shot is added. Okay, and that way you get a pattern that builds, and that's how it would work. So you'd have those 5 pattern slots in your drum box. Let's get rid of all these tracks. Oh. You'd have all those patterns in your drum box, pattern 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 5, and then you'd build the linear song around that. So you'd say, well look, you know what, I'm going to start with the kick for 4 bars, and I'm just going to do Command R to make this pattern repeat 2, 3 times. So, and I'm going to bring in the markers, but I don't want the marker thing, I don't want the signature, I don't want the tempo, I just want the arrangement markers, and that's my intro. Well, you know what, actually let's make it 4 bars, because 4 bars of kick, right? 4 bars of kick. That's the intro. And that, turn the metronome off, that's giving a thing to get the to sync the music in for the DJ and everything, right? Then we go to the next 4 bars, make another marker. 4 bars. So you've started off with pattern 1 playing for 4 bars, and then you go to the next 4 bars and you bring in pattern 2, right, which has got the addition. Just Command R, repeat that 1, 2, 3. So now we've got 4 bars of pattern 2, which is the added open hat. Right. Then we go to the next 4 bars. Make another marker just so we still we're on the intro, and now we use pattern 3. Pattern 3, copy that over, repeat it. Pattern 3 now comes in for bar 9 to 13, bringing in the closed hat, and then the next 4 bars we use pattern 4. Pattern 4 has got the addition of the clap. Now you could do it like that, or you could start off with 4 of the kick and then come straight in with the pattern with the clap. You know, but your building is the point. That's why dance music has this character of it builds from something basic, something gets added, 8 bars later something else gets added, 8 bars later something else gets added, and it builds and builds and builds, because it's following the golden rule of don't give them everything at once. Bring things into your arrangement bit by bit. That's the same for rock, pop, or any genre, right? You don't never give them everything at once. Although, yes, there is a technique where you come in with the full-blown thing for 4 bars and then back off to nothing. There is that technique, but generally speaking, you don't give them everything at once. You build, build, build. And it's because of this pattern thing. You see, you'd start with one pattern, and on live, you'd have that pattern, and then you press the next pattern, and at the end of the previous pattern, it switches to the next pattern, right? That's why generally dance music has this technique of building. So there's my intro. Starts with kick. It's boring, right? But this is just for so it can be synced in with the previous record. And you might, you know, if this was faster, trance music uses this technique. All genres pretty much use this technique that come from older roots. There'll be sounds and things happening over that as the drums build and build and build, you know. And then in comes the hat. And then in comes the closed hat. And then in comes the clap. And then at the end of that, we'll get into our full beat, pattern 5, right? Which has the rim shot. Now, let's get some synth patterns, because as well as the basic patterns in our drum box, labeled 1 to whatever, we've got the basic patterns in our sequencer, which is synchronized to our drum box. So if I go back to that previous song, not that one, where is it? That one? Yes, where we got the 3 basic patterns. Copy them, Command C. Go back to our thing where we've built this drum thing. Right. Now, I'll put the play at the beginning and do paste, Command V, and create new tracks for the regions. You paste on tracks with matching. Right, will it create the instruments? Oh, hasn't created any bloody tracks. Let's do that again. Command V. Oh, come on. What logic you can... Ah, there we are. Oh, it's called it Classic House Organ, but there's nothing on the bloody channel. Oh, that's great. Okay, so I'll have to put house... classic house organ for that track. Tech bass for this one. Let's just search tech bass for that one, and dark chords for that. Dark chords. There it is. There's our 3 sounds. Now, right, again, as you build, the technique would be you start with the basic drum pattern, and then it goes after 4 bars to the next drum pattern where something else comes in, and then something else for the next 4, and then something else for the next. You will tend to work in 4s and 8s, etc., and 16s for longer passages. Now, at the beginning, you can say, well, shall I, when the kick comes in, shall it come in with this organ? Or shall it come in with the bass? No, we're going to leave the bass for the impact when we get into the full beat at bar 17. So we'll come in with the house organ thing. So the way it would be working is your drum sequencer's playing pattern 1 over and over there 4 times, while your hardware sequencer plays pattern 1, which is this 4-bar synth pattern. And then that repeats. Right? Now at the next bit, let's repeat that again. At the next bit, we know our clap's going to come in, isn't it? The clap? No, it's the closed hat. So to add extra interest there, we could bring in the other synth sound here, maybe. Right? Then those two play. Those two play for the next and final 4 bars of the intro. And then when we get to bar 17, that should be intro. When we get to bar 17, the song comes in proper, or the main groove all comes in proper with pattern 5 of the drums, right? And then it and lower the open hat a bit. Okay, so then we're into that, and we let that play for 8 bars. We let that, the whole thing, where the full beat comes in, the bass comes in then as well to add the whole thing, and that's where we're getting into the full groove. Now, another common technique, let me just remove the library, another common technique is just before you get into the new bit where it comes all in. you drop the drums out for half a bar. Like that. That's a very common thing, to just drop out for half a bar, or it can be for a whole bar. Whatever, yeah, but it's not always about adding something when there's a drop. There's often a drop before a new bigger section comes in. And again, this is, you just knock that pattern out. You'd hit mute on the drums just for that last half a bar, and it would create a tension, then release it, and you're into the full beat with the bass line coming in, right? And here's where the song starts proper. And yes, in the pattern here you might put a little fill or something, you know, you might put a little fill just in just a little fill like that with the last half of the bar. And then if you go to your step editor here and look for that, there's the snare fill, right? And to make it crescendo up in velocity, use the line tool and just crescendo it up like that. So you get that little crescendo. You know, then in this pattern here, go back to the piano roll. Might be a cymbal there to bring in that next part. Okay, so we come out the intro here. Here we're into the next 8 bars, so we need to bring something in of interest. It's all about adding and then taking away. The taking away bits are where the song breaks down, drops back, right? So here we'll put in a software instrument, and I'm going to use synthesizer strings, epic synth strings. You'd have a simple string synth or something. Now in here, these are going to be, everything else is rhythmic. So this will be, let's not make this rhythmic. This is going to be just a simple note. Like that. Right. Four bars. 4 bars. Let's put the cycle range around it. 4 bars. 1 whole bar of that held note. And then there. With the little 2 notes at the end into. And then that would be a pattern in your hardware sequencer. Repeat it. Right, so it does that twice. Let me just get rid of the marker track the tempo track and the signature track, so we just see the arrangement markers. So the second time it repeats. Right, and then we're into the next bit. So you copy all those patterns over. The drum patterns and the rhythmic bass, organ and the dark chord pattern and the string pattern for the next bit, because we want to go into something different now. We want to add something to build it, right? So we're going to have this over the next 8 bars. But what is going to be the difference? Well, the difference is going to be we're just going to add in an extra string note. Right? And that can be just a drone, low in velocity. And there, we'll go up a note. Like that. And as long as that note harmonises with these two, yeah. Then we got our next bit. Now what? And this technique is the same in rock, making rock songs. What do we do now? Do we add something else? No. Let's back off to less. So we're going to take this section here, all right, that section, and bring it across. So after the big string, after the high string comes in, we drop back to less. And at the end of that, I could put a really high string. Just that very high string note, just to give me the last half of the bar into the break, like this. Doesn't work. There, sorry, I put it on the wrong pitch. And then you back off. You back off. Right? So, what have we created so far? Intro, bringing in the drums bit by bit, but with a basic instrument. We added a second instrument for the next 8 bars. 8 bars, 4 bars of intro, 4 bars of intro with just the basic organ. Then another 8 bars, this section here, bringing in the second instrument. Then 8 more bars where we bring, this is where the song comes in proper after the break, and we're bringing in the bass. Then the strings come in here after these 8 bars. And they last for 16 bars and then drop out. So we got this. it drops to nothing. You either have another fill or you drop the drums out, and then we come back in with our strings again, but with the extra upper chord note. Right, so this is our 4 bars of drums, bring those over, and these are our other instruments there, bring those over. Right, copy all that over, and we're into the next 8 bars. Let's put a burst marker in there. And then for the next bit, we've got the drop out there, right? So from the drop out, the drop out of the strings here. Now here, as that high string note is droning into this breakdown, it's a mini breakdown. We're not dropping everything out, but we're dropping out the strings. That could have a crescendo of some type there. Yeah, I mean, you'd use a sampler to do that in the old days. Some sort of sample sound that you're pitching up or something. But here, for now, I'm just going to use a software instrument. I'm going to go to cinematic. Not effects. Not that. Synthesizer. Arrangement effects. Okay, and then here, just at the end of that, you'd have a pattern that would just give you some rising up sound at the end there, with that high drone string coming in. And we're in what, A? So I don't know what sound this is going to be. Let's put bike riser on it. Or not a downer. FM builder? I don't know. No. Pitch twist builder? No. Riff riser? Right. Now this could be a cycle loop. This could be a loop of a female vocal going with an echo. I'm going, which you're pitching up, but that leads us into the break, right? Then back in with the strings, but without the high one at the end, right? And we have 8 bars of that, right? Now, probably at this point, it would be a good idea to bring in another drum. So let's title this Tom, and then I'm just going to take. All we need is a tom pattern here, a simple tom pattern, right? To go with the beat. Right. So what can we do? Or some pattern. Yeah, let's have a ride maybe. Oopsie daisy, long note from left over from when we were doing the strings. louder. Shaker maybe. Doing some little something like that. Don't know if this is going to work. Let's put it in every quarter beat. This is a shaker now, right? Yeah, you can hear that. But to make it more intense, I'm going to give it some. I'm going to do some of that. And in the old days, you wouldn't have any fancy schmancy effects. So what would you do? Well, you'd put on a guitar pedal, and what we're going to put on it is a, if I can find one, a bit hard to see these things, not a phaser, a phaser, tremolo. Well, there only seems to be one flanger. Oh no, there's one. So we're going to put a flanger pedal on this shaker. Right, now let's move this out of the way so we can solo it. Something like that. That's all you need, just a little something extra. Right, it just builds, and then command R, and these all should be called shaker. Yeah, they're all the shakers coming in there. Just adds a little something extra when we come back in with the strings, right? Now that repeats, all of that repeats for an 8-bar block there. That's an 8-bar block. Right, so grab all that and copy it over for another 8 bars, and then at the end of in the next 8 bars we're going to have that high string coming in again, the high string with that riser at the end of it. Then I'll show you another thing that we used to do in the old days. Right, so we're coming into the second bit out of that break, right, with the high. Well, let's go from the break down here, right. Another technique that you do in the old school with the old stuff is, remember, these are all patterns in a sequencer. So you'd have your drum pattern playing and you'd have your other patterns here playing, and you would take that block of patterns and repeat them. So I'm going to put the playhead there, that last little riser bit, right? Right? And I'm going to chop through the other patterns at that point. And then, oh, and the string. So this would be a section of the music as a pattern. So we take all that, and we, after that rise up, we repeat it. Repeat. So we're going from here. That's the end of the riser. I'm going to colour that one blue, just so I know that's the riser. Let's put another marker in, and we'll call this. We'll call all this bit the chorus. Let's say it's not or something. Then we're going to go into this bit we'll call the bridge. So we've repeated the last section of that with the riser here. All this, right? And we're going to repeat it again, and again, and again over 8 bars. So we come out of that riser riff into this bit, and we just repeat the riser over and over again. You've got to hear that in context. So coming out of the break here, let's go back to this, the breakdown after the riser there. Now we're into the breakdown. Shakers. Right, you see now, and now we repeat that over and over. So actually, this isn't the chorus, this is something else. We'll call it the bridge. And this is the chorus, when that thing comes in, it really powers in. Now at this point, we'd probably introduce another instrument. So let's do that. Synth, new software instrument track, and this we're going to use an arpeggiator, because arpeggiators back in the day were huge in synths. Basic arpeggiator. I'll try this Gnarly Trance Pluck. Right now, what might work is if we use the strings, copy the pattern down because it's got the right notes in, right? Then we don't want them all because it's an arpeggiator, so we're going to choose one of these notes, the root note. Let's try the top note. Mute these. Here we go. Then the next one. Right, so that is, wait a minute. That is the note we're going to use. So I'll actually delete the other two. So they've got that single note doing the arpeggiation that comes in with the rise repeat. That would be a pattern, right? The next pattern, we're going to go up. And the next pattern we're going to go up. And then the next pattern. But halfway through that pattern, we're going to go to the very, very, very top A. So we get this. And then that whole lot will repeat. Now, I could get all these patterns and just repeat them, right? But there is a technique in Logic with the marker here above all that. I just copy the marker, Alt, and copy it across. It copies all the content underneath. Bam. So I've doubled my chorus. And then we'll cycle back to another part of our song. Like maybe there. Let's try it. So from the very beginning, here we go. Break in the drums there. breakdown. So you copy this bit over to there because you're dropping back to these patterns and then build again. You see that's the technique. So that's really the best kind of as a without getting into a genre. That's the nature of the beast of using this technique, right? But that is the technique around which all dance music, original dance music, is based. That's how it works. That's why it has the way that it works, building and dropping out, building and dropping out, building and dropping out. Now, of course, you'd have your sampler, and for your sampler, you could have some loops in there. And if I change this to one of the percussionists, Latin percussion, then we could have, for this chorus bit here, we could have Latin percussion. Or we could introduce the Latin percussion in the break here. Something, right? I don't know, but let's try that. So we're going to introduce the Latin percussion after this riser break. When it rises up with the strings, then drops back to nothing. Like, I don't know if it'll work that pattern, but... take those out actually, so our Latin percussion, I don't know if the pattern works here, let's hear it, comes in. And then we get that. The percussion coming in with our repeat bit. Yeah, and you know what, I'm just going to, across the whole final mix, I'm just going to slap this IK Multimedia 1, which is a very clever but simple plugin that just does a bit of everything. Body, focus, air, push, the amount of compression, bass punch, analog, grit, etc. And I'll just load a preset. It'll just give it, well, like it says here, loudness button or Berlin lovers. Let's try that. Here we go. So you just slap a compressor across your final mix, and I'm also going to put over there a limiter. Oh, this has nothing to do with what I'm showing you. I want to just not you. Where is it? It's called. I think I've got it in my favourites. There's another IK unit, I really like their stuff. It's called the, not the brick wall limiter, the, come on, where is it? Stealth limiter. Yeah, I'm just going to whack a bit of this stealth limiter across it just to reduce the output, yeah. then look, I'll add in another track here, a drummer track in the genre electronic, create, push it to the top, just because we used the 909 there, right? But all I'm going to do with this is just going to be used for one thing, and one thing only, get rid of all that. Go to this pattern here, I want everything out, apart from the kick, no fills, I just want a simple kick pattern. And this pattern hang on, it's just reinforcing the 909 drum, which is not much of a kick. Well, it's not straight out of the box, I don't want to mess around with it, so I'm just adding this as an overlay. I compress the snot out of it. Right, so that's just going to reinforce my 909 kick. And in fact, you know, maybe this would be coming from a sampler. This would be a drum box, but the sampler would come in here with a heavier kick. And I'll just repeat that, repeat it, repeat it, repeat, 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 repeat. But I'll leave a couple of beats over that gap, maybe. Repeat, repeat. Don't keep going back there. But not over that gap, let's say. So then we want to copy that manually over to there, and then again repeat, 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 repeat. So now we've got a beefed up kick drum, and I've just beefed up the mix a bit. So kick drum in the intro is less beefy. Is some basic stuff. You get the idea of it. This is how dance music evolved. You were using drum boxes with patterns, and that would be synchronized to a Latin percussion box, like an early Korg or Roland drum box that did only Latin sounds. or it could be a pattern you created yourself using Latin samples in an early sampler. So your drum box would have its own pattern sequencer. That would be synchronized to your hardware sequencer, which would have all the patterns you put in for the bass, the synth, and everything like that. Arpeggiators would clock to provide arpeggiated patterns. And so you were limited in what you had. You had basic instruments, you had your basic drum sounds, you had a sampler which could fire off some loops, or fire off some sounds, or fire off a vocal hit or something, right? And really that was your lot. And that forced you to construct music in this way, in blocks. Building, 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 adding something as you went along, then dropping out back to less, and then coming in with something else, and building and dropping back, building and dropping back. And that's maybe useful to some people who are looking to get into this, right? And then the other thing is, as I said at the beginning, don't focus so much on pitch and melody. Think about the rhythm patterns, because all the synth patterns, all the bass line patterns, all the other type of patterns, anything that isn't a chord progression is a rhythmic pattern. So focus on learning as much drum patterns as possible and cross rhythms as possible. Tap those in using a drum, and then transfer the pattern to an instrument with pitch, and try then moving the notes around to create interesting pitches, melodies but you're basing it on a rhythm pattern, not because when you sit down with the synth and you've got the keys in front of you, your mind tends to be focusing on what melody shall I play rather than the rhythm. But using this technique of focusing entirely on the pattern, the rhythm, because another thing that used to happen in the old days is you would knock out a rhythm and then you'd switch its MIDI channel or something, and it would suddenly be triggering a completely different sound, not a drum anymore. And that would create a pattern. Or you'd take a synth pattern and make it trigger a drum box, and you get a completely different sound, something different, right? Because those synth pattern notes would trigger different drums. So you'd often get these kind of things happening, but there, I hope that is useful in terms of a tutorial on how do I make dance music, because this is the essence of all dance music. It's how it works, really. Then it's just a question of what tempo, what beat, what style are you doing, you know. Okay, so I hope that's useful. People might laugh and thumb it down, you know, but one artist I really like is Hobo, and there's an old track of his called Berlin Booty, and if you listen to it, it follows exactly these rules. It brings things in and drops things out, and it's because it's the foundation of how dance music works, really. So it starts with a simple beat, and then a sound fades in and drops out, and then another drum instrument comes in, and it builds and builds and builds, and then a tom comes in, another instrument, another drum instrument, and then that little tip cowbell comes in, etc., etc. Maybe that makes sense to some of you. Okay, so yeah, there you go. See you for the next video, whatever it is.